Hey, Paul.
Hey, Fab, how are you?
I'm amazing. Yourself?
Good. I'm really good.
Cool.
See, Fab, now that we're allowed, we even share an office. We should be doing the podcast in the office together.
The problem with that is that it screws up my whole post-production.
Okay. All right. So then I'll come to your house.
All right. Sounds good. We have to stream it live. Basically, we have to do it through a restream. That's how it goes.
That's the most important thing, right? Okay. So
We'll figure
today,
it out.
we're going to talk about
value propositions.
Yeah.
What is a value proposition?
What is a value proposition?
Let's start there.
What is value proposition? Well, your value proposition is what your company, let's say in this case, we'll talk about the company, so the owner of the company or the company itself brings as value to the client. What is the value that they bring to their clients?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, when they sell, we've talked about this a million times, they sell features, they sell benefits, and they're selling like the actual, what the thing does, which is important. I mean, you need to know what the thing actually does and how it's going to help you. But ultimately, your value proposition is what you're bringing to the table for your client to consider. Why is it that they should be doing business with you? Right. So if we take any software or any product, any service, your value proposition is, how am I going to help you achieve that objective or solve that problem? And I guess the question becomes, well, how do you find out your own value proposition, right? So it might be different for every client, right? You might be saying, well, for one client, I'm doing this, for another client, I'm doing that. But ultimately, it'll probably, if you're selling a similar software or to everyone, you'll probably be solving the same kinds of things everywhere. Let's use I don't know, QuickBooks.
Right.
So what's QuickBooks value proposition is that they help you. For me, for example, they help me as a business owner organize and structure the whole administration of my invoicing and keeping accounts on, everything that's business wise. That's what they do for me. They have all these nifty features and it looks cool. It's easy to use. That's wonderful. But their value proposition is that they're, for a small monthly fee, they're helping me and saving me an enormous amount of time. They're creating efficiency so that I can do what I do normally. So that would be the value proposition.
Right.
And it's actually quite simple and quite direct. But we often forget as salespeople, as sellers, to mention and to think about that and ask those questions and ask ourselves that question of, what do we bring to the table? And if there's a competitive market, so it's not only what you bring to the table, but what differentiates you in your value proposition. What do you do that might be helping the client achieve its objectives in an easier way? I don't know if you have an online app, or if it's super simple, or if, for example, with QuickBooks, you can take pictures of your bills, and there's a bunch of stuff that you can do.
Right. And I mean, ultimately, I'm guessing the value proposition, the way I see it, is it's important because, it'll dictate how you speak to your clients or potential clients, right? And it helps you step away and understand the value you bring, step away from features, because let's face it, most companies right now in almost every space, have competitors and they all do similar stuff, right? Like, whether that's software, there's a lot of different accounting software out there, whether it's like not lead piping, but like plastic piping, let's say, there's a lot of companies that build plastic pipes, right? So I think a lot of companies are in this situation where a lot of competitors are doing the same thing or similar things, so that the value proposition is what helps you figure out if the client's a good fit, or even help the client figure out what's a good fit. And what I find is also important is that it's also not the only one, but also part of what connects all your revenue teams, right? Marketing and customer service and sales. Because if my messaging in marketing is like, we're the cheapest on the market, and then sales is like, no, like, we help, increase your revenue with, by managing your whole back office, well, there's a disconnect there, right? Like one's going to be speaking to the different types of clients. And so your value proposition is what's kind of one of the connectors of all those three groups.
Exactly. And it's interesting you say that, because if you look at it that way, I mean, everything in sales, everything we talk about, whether it's quantifying, whether it's solving an objection, whether it's asking questions, it's all part of a circular thing. You can't really disjoin it, right? Um, and figuring out your value proposition is really listening to your client and seeing how you're going to help them move forward. And if you're right, so if your marketing is in tune with your sales, and you're sort of advertising or pushing the message about the value proposition you bring to most people, you're helping yourself move forward, right? So
Right.
as if I'm talking to again, if QuickBooks is advertising to people trying to get them on board, so they might mention the things that a lot of people find is valuable in using their services.
Right.
And you need to have that conversation. You need to have that discovery call every time. Because although you know what your value proposition is, and you might be that your client still needs to say it to you, because it needs to come out of their mouth. And sometimes
Right.
subtle differences are expressed,
Mhm.
but ultimately your value proposition is connecting what you do to what they need, right?
Right.
And that's your value proposition.
Right.
But for some reason, it's really hard to do, and and we forget to do that,
And
Uh,
it's related to the way I see it is partly related anyway, to something we talked about. I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but which is about, it's easier to do product training, right, than to train your salespeople on how to ask questions and stuff like that. And so in the same way, it's easier to train your reps on selling, quote unquote, selling features, right? Same thing for marketing. It's easier to say like, well, we have expandable folders, and we have, you could take pictures of your receipts and stuff like that, which is important. But I mean, the reality is like anybody else can do that, right? And
yeah,
so unless you have like unless your value proposition is very clearly integrated with your features. So for example, when we had Kate from Lately a few months back, like the fact that they use AI to populate and build their social posts. Well, that's a feature, but it's also tightly knit to their value proposition, right? But in most cases, like taking a picture of your receipts, I mean, that's a feature that's easily replicable, easy to replicate.
yeah, easily replicated, correct.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so what it boils down to, I think, and from what you're saying makes a lot of sense. What it boils down to in the end is your value proposition, again, will be most likely very repetitive. So if you're looking out, so for example, if you're looking out for the things that you're most likely going to hear, you'll get better and better at proposing the value that gets them to where they need to go. So
Right.
if you're selling wheels to clients, no, it's not a good example. If you're selling, some service that helps people attain their objectives, and you're seeing that 95% of the time there's this problem, well, you're listening out for it and you're hearing it, and then you can give examples of how you've dealt with that in the past, right? So interesting, you should say this, Mr. Client. Well, we've done this in the past, and that'll help you in your value proposition well, because it establishes credibility, right? Because you've been through there before.
Right. And I think, and you kind of mentioned the wheels, and I don't know where you wanted to head with that initially, but what it triggered for me, what it made me realize is that, it's easy to say, well, we have a commodity product. There's no real value, right? It was just wheels are wheels, and we're just going to go off of sales competencies and prospecting abilities and just building our existing accounts. But the reality is, a value proposition doesn't need to be at all tied back to your product, right? Like if you're able to build wheels faster than anybody else on the market, or you build custom wheels, or you just do wheels in a very specific industry or whatever, these are all value propositions.
Yeah,
If you're the quickest on the market or the most efficient to deliver them, well, that's a value proposition. Not every client will want that. Some clients are maybe in a specific industry and they know it takes time because it's very custom spec. But a lot of them, we just want our wheels quickly. Like these are standard wheels. We just need them, and so I think the value proposition goes beyond, what what's obvious with the product,
Yeah.
right? You're talking about QuickBooks, like the obvious thing is helping you organize your back office, but there could be other elements that are a bit further away from the core of what the product actually does.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have the time and it's a consultative sale, you're right. Even if you're selling a commodity, there is a value proposition in your commodity, or else or else people would never choose you, right? So
Right.
there's some, if you're quicker than anyone else, but you make it exactly like everyone else, and the transport is cheaper, well, you're creating efficiency there. Your value proposition is not your price and your efficiency, but it's the value that it brings to the client, because it makes them capable of achieving their goals more quickly, right?
Right.
And we often skip that because we know, well, my efficiency obviously is good for the client. Why would I mention that? Well, no, it's important to mention it because that's really what it's about, and you can't lose track of these things.
Right.
So it's a very interesting, way of looking at things, and I think that's an important thing. Yeah.
And so, how do you build your value proposition? How do you develop it? How do you develop? I don't know which the right way to say it.
Oh, that's a good. So what you need to, if you're working with a client or working with you're in the service industry and you're trying to help a company or someone figure out their value proposition, the first question you need to ask the people is, what are the problems that you solve? Absolutely. But what are the objectives that you help people achieve?
Mm-hmm.
What is the motivation for your client to do business with you? And if they answer, well, we give them a better product. No, that's not valuable. So because we give them a better product, they are capable of delivering superior quality and longevity to their clients, which makes it such that they get more clients. They can use that in their marketing, and then they can grow and become number one leaders in Canada, right? So that's your value proposition in that specific client. Now, if that's repetitive, if for most of your clients you're offering them better quality that enables them to have better efficiency, that enables them to keep their clients, well, that's your value proposition.
Right.
It's never, your value proposition is never about your product. Well,
right.
I'm sure there's some, but it's always about what you bring to them, and you need to understand that. So when you're training your salespeople, when you're training your marketing, when you're talking to anybody, they need to be aware of what is it that we really bring to the client.
Right.
What is it that we're doing most of the time? What are the things that we're helping with? And if you don't know that, you need to find out, right?
Right.
And that's crazy important.
It is. And so you're making me think, like I talked about earlier, because we had Kate on a few months ago, or a few weeks, I don't remember. But and you're right, like the AI element, I position that as a value prop, but it isn't, right? The value prop is like they save time, or they help you save time, right? Like creating social posts from scratch takes a long time. There, it helps you by giving you ideas or generating ideas for you. So I guess that's what the value prop would be. Time.
Yeah. I think the only time the value proposition is really the product itself is when you're in B2C, having a nice watch or a good looking car or a fancy bike. Like these are just sort of end user products, or like, the value proposition is, well, you're going to have a fancy car. Does it get you from A to Z quicker? Yeah, it can, but usually with the stoplights, it does. Will it be comfortable? The extra $200,000 you're spending on a Ferrari is not necessarily going to make the ride more comfortable. It's so the value proposition is more, well, I want this car for whatever reason. For one person, it might be, well, I want to look good. The other person, I want the best quality. The other person goes fast and holds a road, but it's usually in the car itself, because you could give them a car that holds the road just as well, and like, no, I want the Ferrari. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. And I guess it's also, if you're maybe in a dominant position in the market, right? Like LinkedIn, the value proposition is that it's LinkedIn, right? Yeah. Like you're not a small networking.
But there too, I mean, I would disagree with you. I would say that it's not because it's linking. It's because LinkedIn has such a massive market and they can get you to connect with people. It's not the fact that it's LinkedIn. It's because they have
No, but it's become the fact that, you know, to connect with people, you need to be on LinkedIn, right? Like it's moved beyond like, well, if the fastest way, like everybody at this point kind of understands, well, not everybody, but the people in this space understand that LinkedIn allows you to connect to prospects or candidates or recruiters or whatnot.
Yeah, but no one says I want to be on LinkedIn because it's sexy and it's fancy. It's all value proposition, right?
Right. Exactly.
No one says, "Oh, I love LinkedIn. Their colors are so nice." It's not about that. It's about what it does for you, right? But as buyers in our lives, we buy a lot more for ourselves in the B2C world.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of transfer that over to the B2B world approach, and our value proposition gets all twisted. Because ultimately the barriers or the KPIs that people are using in B2B are much less emotional and frivolous and but we buy a lot less of that in my head. You know, if I think of all the clothes you've bought, you know, that art behind you, you know, those drums, you know, none of those people gave you a value proposition. You wanted it. You went in there and you bought the shirt because it looked nice. The fact that it cost $20 or $30, you know, you know, that painting behind you, you may have paid, you know, $1,000 for it. Well, to you, it's just for your eyes. What's the value proposition? It makes your eyes happy, right? So it's all B2C. So a lot of what we buy in life, most of what we buy is B2C. So we forget when we're in a B2B environment that the value proposition is really about building a connection to those objectives rather than the actual thing itself, you know?
Right.
Imagine, it's funny, let's do it for a second. Imagine you're in a B2B environment and you're trying to sell like B2C. Oh, well, QuickBooks has a nicer interface. It goes, you know, it looks better, you know, it's smoother when it clicks, you know, it's gotta, you know, like,
you know. Yeah. But I guess you could argue that's the value proposition, right? Of like Apple, it just kind of works, right? Which is obviously not.
But Apple's B2C.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. Is that their value proposition is like who you are and how you'll feel buying it. But I get what you're saying.
That is totally. It's funny because I'm Apple and Fab's not, and that's totally what the non-Apple guys say. I actually appreciate the organized state of the interface when it comes on board, because I think today with a PC you can get just as nice as a user experience, but because I've been with Apple for years and they probably locked me up, it's just easier for me. It's easier for me to interface. I'm no longer I need to have an Apple product. I used to be like that 10 years ago, but now I'm like, I don't care.
Well, now it's just easier, right? You're just familiar.
Now it's just easier. Everything's Apple, you know, and you know, I maybe wrongfully so, but I feel that my iPhone's a little safer security wise, and that kind of stuff. But that's an interesting point because, you know, there are things that sort of they'll overlap, right? So if you're a real estate person selling corporate real estate, it's gonna your sales going to be very B2C-ish, right? Because there's comfort in sitting in there. Now, if you're selling real estate all over the world and different locations, and the decision maker is not going to be sitting in all those offices, and all of a sudden it's becoming a lot more B2B,
right?
You know, and it's
but to your point, like you were drawing the parallel or not with B2C, but I think that is a big challenge with a lot of B2B, right? Is they don't talk about value, and then worse, because, you know, obviously you're not talking to every B2B seller out there, is that then marketing doesn't incorporate it. So then you visit, let's say, a B2B website and it means nothing, right? There's nothing there. There's a lot of jargon or whatnot, and there's clearly no value proposition. Well, fine, you might not be the target market and you don't get it, which is fine too. But that's, you know, maybe closing the loop there is about, that's the importance of the value proposition, because the kind of Apple stands for something. Well, in the same way, your company can stand for something. Sure, you're selling PVC piping. It's different, and your value proposition will be completely different, right? Like, and you're not going to have the same but you can still get an emotional appeal to a certain extent, right? Because if you're the fastest to deliver, or if you're 99.9 98% quality, like, like that helps a lot of people's lives, right? Like a lot of buyers who are buying these pipes and there's never a mistake.
Yeah.
You're helping a lot of lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that
business lives.
you're right. And that becomes part of your value proposition. The other thing is if you're green, right? If you're being green might not help you immediately, but it's something that's very important for the environment. So you're saying, well, as a corporate citizen, I want to be green. So the fact that your product might use 10% less, emit 10% less noxious gases when it's being manufactured might have an effect then in the purchasing cycle. So that becomes maybe not so much of an immediate advantage or value to the client, but it's important because they want to be perceived as green more than just for the business it's going to bring to them. So that's something that you can bring.
But it is a value prop because it helps you showcase your value, right? And so somebody who doesn't care about that might still buy from you, but somebody who does care, who was previously with the competition, might buy from you because of that.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
There's definitely value in there, and I think that's it. I think there's definitely a need to identify what your value proposition is or values. Like, right, if you have maybe different benefits that you bring, whether it's if you have different audiences that you sell to. I think there's a lot of need to. There's definitely a lot of need to spend time building that and refining that and thinking about who your best clients are and why were they the best and what's working well for them. Why are we so good with them versus not? And articulating that, whether you're articulating it as a part of a sales conversation through your questioning and stuff like that, or whether it's through copywriting with what's showing up on your website or your ads or your booth at a trade show or whatnot.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And so it's interesting, but ultimately what it really boils back down to, if we come back to the beginning, is you've got to have this conversation. If you're the leader of a company or you're thinking about what's our value proposition, you have to talk about these things. What is it that you're trying to help with? What is it that your product mostly helps their clients achieve? Mm-hmm. So it's an important part of the discussion, which doesn't happen very enough, often enough.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Fab.
Talk to you next week.
Ciao.
Bye.